But there were doves in that office of the Israeli Prime Minister, and they always were rejected. So I don't see what we gain if we.
No. I mean, the only just as a short notice. The only thing I hope is that some many years ago they were thinking the same about other political conflicts, that there won't be a solution. And at some point it turned out that there was one. I really hope it's for Israel, and I do think it's a step further if Israel admits that during wars, that still the Arab side began, but during wars there were places that did not belong to Israel before, and afterwards it belonged. And this is something that has to be argued about. It's something that has to be argued about, that families flee from their homes. Still, with the whole legitimation for Israel, 100%. But we have to talk about it. We have to put it on the table.
No one is blocking this. The best book on the refugees is Benny Mogif. I teach this book. I give it to my students.
Yeah.
I just want that it's on Palestinian rallies and on BDS rallies, when people are screaming from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that makes it clear, and more clear than everything else, that in their mind, in their thinking, there's no place for a Jewish state Israel, even it would be only Tel Aviv, even that,
No, I'm sorry, Tel Aviv is another country.
But you understand what I'm, even that makes clear that as long, and that's why also, and that's the point I want to make clear. And the second point, you spoke about Israeli leadership, which is acting, but what I see, or what I really see, is a lack of an Arab leadership, not even Palestinian one, but there's no power now from any Arab side which will make a deal with Israel, which could make an end. Abbas is 84 years or 85 years, something like that. He's an old man, and let's say everyone is waiting till he's going. So to say
84 is the new 74.
Okay, but you understand. It will be, and there will be the fight for the successors. There will be Obama Bouti, which will try to get power, and other and other one. So that's the first thing. The second point is, and that's also a threat for Israel, to decline Iranian power, even from the Middle East. Iran, but not to get Iran on Israel's border, and to because Iran's how do you say in English? Raison d'être is the destruction of Israel.
Germany supports them. Try to subvert the sanctions. What can we say in Israel?
Yeah, no, but that's what I say. What else? Iran's raison d'être is to destroy Israel, and that's the point which I have to make clear. That's why also, and first step last on there was a counter rally of the Al-Quds Day, and there even German politicians, even from the SPD, asked to forbid Hezbollah as a terrorist organization at its home. Let's say it's the first step, it's the first mark, but that's the way to deal with, to decrease the Iranian power. This is
I completely agree with you. I didn't get at all into the question of German-Israeli specific emotional complications. There was an Israeli psychiatrist who said Germany will never forgive the Jews for Auschwitz. And in a sense he's right. And I wrote a very angry piece for Fathom when Zygmunt Gabriel came to Israel and met with breaking the silence instead of meeting with the Prime Minister. Now, breaking the silence are liars. I have nothing against human rights watch organizations. I'm actually for them. But they are liars. They're spreading stories of how Jews poison the water wells of Arab villages. This is like blood libels from Europe in the 18th centuries. This is nuts. And they're, ask Benvo, documented these things. They're lying through their teeth. And then on Holocaust Memorial Day, the German foreign minister comes to Israel to meet with the human rights organizations. I'll tell you what the message is. You are the real Nazis, not us. That's not a message that Israelis are going to be very receptive for. Now, to be fair, I consider this a German problem and not my business. It's just don't come and try to solve it in my country. This is your business. I understand, I even sympathize to an extent that it's difficult to live with the 20th century German past. But this is not something Jews can help you with and shouldn't. It's not my business. And so when a German foreign minister comes to Israel on Holocaust Memorial Day, if he thinks that this is the right occasion to preach to us about human rights, he's gravely mistaken. And Netanyahu did the right thing. He was actually moderate. Netanyahu is to the right. I'm center right on the issues of the Palestinians, but on this issue it was much more radical. If I were Netanyahu, I would shut the border and say you're not getting in. If you came here to meet Shorim Shtika, you're not passing passport control. Go away, because you don't preach to us on Holocaust Memorial Day. And I think everything regarding the Shoah, except a museum. It's like the same thing. It's the museum is the head of the museum supports the BDS. Yes, but this is a German internal thing, and so I think that around the Holocaust, we shouldn't. This is not a common theme for Germans and Jews. Each here has their own past to deal with. And it's not for us to give forgiveness, and I'm not going to blame young Germans for the sins of their fathers. I supported German unification, which was very difficult for my dad, because I said, I'm speaking not as a Jew, but as a human being, and I look as a historian. I look at history, and if you try to depress national identities, they erupt violently. We saw this in Italy. We saw this in Germany, we saw this in other places. And therefore, the belief in universal self-determination seems to be the rule for peaceful coexistence.
Concerning the Middle East conflict, you mentioned it, and you also mentioned UNRWA, that I think, and I totally agree, that one of the main and core issues is the right of return for the Palestinians, which UNRWA perpetuates. It didn't in the beginning, actually. It was, I think, hijacked in the 60s, but at least in the beginning, they were thinking in terms of also giving Palestinians the right to resettlement and to uphold certain basic standards that you would normally think a refugee agency would do. But there's one common issue which I think is also very basic to the peace process that we have now, is that historically it has always been the Palestinians who rejected any kind of settlement of the conflict. And everybody who wants to know that can see the facts and grasp these, but strangely, we as Europeans always, at least our political elites, turn a blind eye towards it, and we see that both with UNRWA, they do all the funding in order to keep it afloat. And concerning the peace process, we see that they always, or the whole relations with Israel, they make dependent on the process, on the peace process. And so they say if the peace process gets stuck, we will downgrade our relations with Israel, we put more pressure on Israel. So we always try to explain, it takes two to tango. It's not, you cannot get peace unilaterally, but still on the governmental level, Germany is always holding Israel to account concerning the process. So I think this is a very key and core element. It's very difficult to really nail it and to nail it down to this, and to also get politicians to wrap their heads around it, and to make the right, take the right cues from it. But I really feel that this is concerning UNRWA, concerning BDS, concerning the peace process. I think this is the core issue that we need to be talking about, and where I see that that European political elites are in total refusal of all the facts, and in total denial, actually.
I agree. About UNRWA, I hope this book will be coming out in English soon. There's a book by Enat Wilf, the former Labour Party. It's called The War of Return. And UNRWA was created separately precisely because the Arab countries refused the resettlement policy of the General Refugee Agency. So what you say is partly right, but the seeds were there from the very start. Regarding the way that the conflict is seized here, Israel was not always smart. I keep saying, even to right-wing governments, always say yes. Don't worry, they will not say yes. And then we should, and it's clear, and after it gets, because, for instance, the Clinton parameters or the Obama-Kerry peace initiatives, in both cases, the Palestinians said no, and the Israelis said yes, sometimes with...
But the problem is you don't get anything in return. You only give away rights that in Europe they will take for granted, but you don't get anything in return. It's just your status quo.
The good news is that it's not... the Israelis have basically despaired on convincing Europeans. They see few friends in Europe. They're not going to turn their backs on Europe because most of our export is to Europe. But they managed to treat separately European self-righteousness and European pragmatism. And we preserve very good ties with Europe in many things. And we have to put up with all these condemnations in the UN, this double standard, this turning a blind eye, and this... But when Israelis think about this, they mostly think about the Jews in Europe. They, the whole influence of BDS and all the rest of it on Israel as a state, they've not managed to isolate Israel. They've not managed to hurt Israeli import from Europe or export to Europe in any significant way. And so this is painful to contemplate, but the harm is not specifically crucial. Even, we looked at, say, the sanctions on Iran. And we looked at Europe, and you sometimes listen to Europeans, and it looks like they think that Trump is a worse enemy than Iran. It's like they've got their priorities wrong, and they're trying to bypass the sanctions now, and they're not succeeding. So Macron has, declarations on how he is, but Total is pulling out.
Yes.
So I don't see a clear and present danger to Israel. It's a matter that has to do more with image and the maintenance of day-to-day politics. I don't see. The truth is, I don't see a major danger to Israel from this European attitude. Because when Europeans say we'll intervene, they're not able to actually influence the peace process, even as a union. Mogherini hopped back and forth in Israel and no one talked to her. No one thought it's worth investing in. So we saw her going to Ahmadinejad when he was in power, and then the other Ayatollahs, and we just looked at her as like, an Italian socialist weirdo living in the past. It didn't seem to influence anything, because when America steps down on something, that is, when Obama was pressuring Israel to something, this was pressure. This had clear meaning, but it seemed like the counterparty to moral posing is that the pressure on Israel is also more posed than anything else, because the actual ties are not cut, and the actual commercial ties, which are the most important, are not tied. And Europe is not a unified diplomatic power now. for us at least.
Europe doesn't play any role in the Middle East because there's only two powers who play a role. That's USA and Russia. And just now, Bolton and are meeting Jerusalem. Yeah, just in Jerusalem, then USA and Russia are meeting to deal about the Middle East. That's also
you're absolutely right. Russia is, I think one of the most serious things facing Israel now is that we have a border with Russia now in Syria. And this is a nuclear power. This is a superpower. This is not our scale. We can deal maybe even with Iran far away, but we can't. To have a superpower at your door is not a pleasant thing to have. And Europe, I don't think, plays a role in this. And Israelis. Take for example, there was when we teach. I teach history, right? I teach history of Zionism, and what students remember is that the embargo on weapons against Israel in '48. So whenever I tell you got a state because Europe felt guilty about the Holocaust, bullshit. We almost all died in '48 because there was a European embargo on selling weapons to us, and we got them by hook and by crook through the Czechs. That's the truth of '48. Then there was '73, which is considered a major betrayal. Yes. Because in '73 we were on the brink of collapse. Our army was, and Henry Kissinger and Nixon flew weapons, and Europe didn't let it use their airspace because they were afraid of the oil embargo. So these memories are not. So the expectations are fairly small. They're fairly small.
But I just wanted, even Putin backed Iran just now, but there's still very good relationships between the Israeli government and the Russian government. So it's I guess Putin is the most interesting player in this whole, because he has ties with all. He has ties to Iran, he has ties to Egypt, to Turkey, to
But you know what Netanyahu did? He sold him a percentage of the Israeli gas companies because we're competing with them selling gas for Europe. And now we're partners in the gas field with Putin's personally.
Yeah, and
so
because Trump is not very welcome in many Arab countries.
Or in Europe.
But Putin has his ties, and that's why I think he's the most interesting player in the whole conflict. Not Europe and not anyway. Russia is the most interesting player and the most, besides the USA, is the most important.
I agree. We don't know about China yet, but
yeah, but
they're a non-player at the moment.
Well, they're buying stuff all over the Middle East, and so we have a.
I know even in Haifa, but
in Haifa, the Haifa port, but basically, and this is an area of friction with the Trump administration because Israel is supportive of Chinese investment in Egyptian infrastructure, because Egypt is on the brink of collapse economically. It has an economy that cannot sustain 93 million people. And China is basically propping it up with investment in infrastructure. And this is contrary to the Trump policy, but it's something Israel strongly supports, because if Egypt collapsed, look, in a culture of BC, we never say this, but the Arab civilization is in a state of collapse which is unprecedented in history. No principle of order and sovereignty has managed to stabilize in the Arab world. Not monarchies, not Arab socialism in the 50s, not pan-Arabism, and not nation states. These have collapsed too, and now not political Islam. Nothing. We are sitting in the midst of a region that's now melting lava, and we don't know what will happen. So it's in everyone's interest to support the more stable nation states, because if Egypt now collapses into chaos, it's a major problem for stability. And those of you who are dealing with strategy perhaps know that Iraq is on the verge of collapse because of overuse of its water supplies. So we don't know what will happen there. But we are looking for stabilizing forces in the Arab world.
I think that the situation will be going well because even Algeria is also going to collapse on a political way, and I think also on the economic way. Of course, Libya, we know the problems. Even they are not neighbors of Israel, but the influence for Israel will be very, very vast.
We live in a rough neighborhood.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Well, first of all, thank you very much.
Thank you
for coming.
For your patience.
For the interesting perspective, and I think one of the topics that has repeated itself today, which probably within, let's say, civil society, etc., doesn't get repeated and spoken to about enough. For example, the UNRWA refugee, the perpetuation of refugee status. I think that's probably one of the biggest topics. I mean, there was a joke, or one of these cartoons once in a newspaper, if we go back to BDS as a theme, with a a person who looked like a cliche Jew with a sign around their neck reading, I would like to boycott Palestinian products, but they don't have any to boycott. It's funny, but it's not funny. I mean, there are plenty of Palestinians who are doing great work, or doing even high-tech startups, and we've taken some other journalists to see them. Those are individuals, though. As a society, though, it's a victimhood. And I always like to conclude this topic because I always try to speak to people myself when one's talking about the refugee status. My grandfather's second wife was a refugee from Silesia. She wasn't Jewish. She was one of the 12 million Germans. And about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, her son from her first marriage wanted to go back to now Poland, where the village was where she was from. And she didn't want to go, but she ended up going, and I went along, and I thought it was a wonderful experience. And there was a Polish woman who heard us speak German, and she could speak fluent German because she was forced laborer in Germany, but also stayed in Germany until I think the 70s or the 80s also. And just spent, I mean, it was such a small village. I mean, after half an hour we were about to leave, and this woman gave my grandmother, as a gift, a big glass of pickles. In Poland and Germany are both famous for their pickles. About a week later in Berlin, I said to my step-grandmother, what are these pickles? I want to try these pickles. And she told me, I threw them away. And she had a look of guilt on her face, but then she said, listen, Oliver, you have to understand, I never wanted to go back. That was my past. I met your grandfather, we got married, and this is the road I took. And she was very conscious. She said, I knew when I was expelled from my home, I knew that the people who were going to live in my home were also expelled. Those were the Poles from the Ukraine that were expelled when Poland was moved over. And I thought that was a very interesting perspective. Who knows when to start the refugee statuses of people, but let's say between the end of the Second World War and the mid-1950s, where the aftermath of the Second World War took place, there were hundreds of millions of refugees or ethnically cleansed people or exchanges of population. I'll talk about, well, let's say from the First World War. We talk about the Turkish-Greek exchange. We talk about Pakistan, India when it was created. Literally hundreds of millions of people. We're talking about 5 million Poles, 12 million Germans. It didn't matter who started a war. And there's only one group left today from that period, that window of period, that are still refugees. Which leads me, you said Tel Aviv is another country. My joke is, Tel Aviv then is the biggest refugee camp. Kalanya, I don't know who's been to Kalanya, but Kalanya for me, I mean, has luxury shops and I don't see a refugee status. But of course, the refugees, people of that heritage, people who've been refugees.
They're descendants of refugees.
So, sure, well, some of them are still alive. I mean, from 1948, there's plenty of people still alive, so I don't want to deny them their right to have been a refugee. But so is in Tel Aviv, or my step-grandmother. So I think that is really an important necessity to kill that status of perpetual refugee. My step-grandmother was born not a refugee, she became a refugee, but she didn't die a refugee in her attitude. So I think that's one very important story I always like to say, because unfortunately, it's the right of the return which perpetuates everything at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think it even perpetuates the BDS movement. Because I don't think the BDS movement would have a chance if all the Arab Palestinians could go back to their homes. They wouldn't have
That's the number one goal.
of course it's the number one goal. So anyway, that's something that has to be found. I agree that there's one issue from Itamar about Israel could maybe do more. Question is, why should Israel have to be the only one who does more? But I come from the point of and you mentioned Obama's foreign policy, and that I found that came a little bit into a conflict, because if you look at, and I'm not an Arabologue, I'm not an Arab specialist, etc., but I do know people who come from certain countries after traveling 70 places on earth. There's certain cultures you cannot tell them you did something wrong. Because if you tell them you did something, in our Western Europe liberal society, we have been educated to say, I'm sorry, I did something bad. That shows strength, and it shows maturity. But it took World War II to create that even in Europe, okay? To apologize even for things that happened 100, 200 years ago. In other countries, when Israel pulls out of Gaza, people, the Palestinians, don't thank Israel for it. They see it as a winning of the war. Or as soon as somebody says, I'm sorry, we did something wrong, they see it as our weakness. And that does not promote peace for them, because I'm not talking about individuals. Societally, the Palestinians will not see an apology as an apology. They'll see it as, we won. And that's not the point. The point is nobody should win, both should be winners. And that means a handshake.
I think Israel will be more if it sees that there's leadership on the other side which will grant for it. Then I see, because at the status quo as it is, there will be nothing, because there's no partner to lead this. I see no part.
There's no Palestinian peace movement.
And there's no part. If there will be a leadership which you can deal with them, then I'm sure Israel will do more than it does now. But because if I do something, there will be.
It's not just the leadership. It's also, and it's unfortunate, and I don't want to play that all Arabs, all Palestinians are bad people, because they're absolutely not. But it is in the court, the ball. Today we have populist tendencies, and populist tendency bases most of its strength on security. Okay. Now, if you want to take from Israeli policy, and there is a lot we can talk about negatively about Israeli policy, but if you want to take the rug out of under the mantra, we need security, the Palestinians actually have to do it. And I give the naive, when Sharon went up to the Temple Mount, and the Palestinians said, welcome, can we give you a tour? Maybe they would have had a state today. But they went with that provocation, and yes, Sharon was a provocateur, but they that's exactly what he wanted, but that's how they fed into it. They have to stop showing the violence, and then Israel can't even play that card. So it's leadership, but it's also the violence.
But just because it was Sharon walk on the mountain, and then Arafat started the second Intifada. Arafat started the Intifada not because Sharon.
But that was that was the trigger, and
the narrative,
and it still fed the power to Israel to use the mantra of security.
No, because Arafat failed to make a deal in Camp David.
Okay, but
He failed. It was his.
He didn't fail, he refused.
He refused. And they had half of Jerusalem.
So I believe just to that remark, I believe we are missing one word: proportion. Because when Itamar asked about the failures of the state of Israel, guys, I don't think any of us here claims, any of us Israelis claims that Israel is 100% doing the right thing 100% of the time. Nobody argues that Israel is not doing mistake but I'm taking you back to the word proportion. In every field, if you prepare and you do a research and you see with researching facts and you take Israel in the real benchmark of other countries, you mentioned victims of uninvolved casualties, okay? With taking the right or the wrong political initiatives, etc., Israel is not that different from any other. I might argue that in most of the times, even better. But you must understand that when the attitude is, okay, we are to be blamed, the result, because of we are living in kind of an era of fake news, that this becomes the news. And I will just give you an example of yesterday. We had a very similar meeting, and then a very respectful lady, and on her card it says, documentarist, peace negotiator, and environmental.
Business cards are easy to print.
She was attacking Gadi for his chutzpah, we say in Hebrew, for how come he's talking at all, because she listens only to historians. So we said, lady, this guy has PhD in history. But you said that Trump is doing some right thing. How can you compare to Trump? How can you compare to Orban? And after I tried to ask her to say the details, she ran to the very easy sort of, you are not open-minded, you do not see your faults. And every time, it was the best thing, managing the event was just to say, okay, thank you, and go. But I wanted other people, she was not my target, but I wanted other people to realize how it happens that you hear all those claims about Israel. So this, by the way, Jewish lady, she was Jewish, she said, right? This Jewish lady was talking about the ways Israel is preventing water from people in East Jerusalem, that Israel is preventing electricity from the Gazan people. Now, I don't know if you know the facts, but literally today is another day when Israel, under rockets and under those firing balloons, is making an electricity line to Gaza, because
we're the only state who supplies electricity to an enemy time of war, and almost the only state.
And under attack.
Because we're only the only supplier.
No, they have a border. They have. You see,
They have a
they
border
have a
with
border
Egypt.
with Egypt.
So what? I don't understand the point.
No,
Okay.
it's
So-
again still
I'll give you-
it's 100% true. Everything what you say, I agree to 100%. We are just not allowed to forget that to point with the finger on other countries and say, hey, why are you not mentioning this one? It doesn't make us. It doesn't put us to a better light. And still, I say it as in very conscious as a middle right wing person. That Israel has 100% right to exist as it is, but still, let us be more open. I mean, sure, there are countries where it's not that common. Baruch Hashem, we are in a society where it is common. So let us be proud. This is what I'm saying.
First of all, in principle, you're of course right, and you're of course entitled to your opinion, and I hope it didn't sound as if I'm attacking your point of view.
No.
Okay? But in this very complex neighborhood where we are living, sometimes we don't have the luxury of doing some things that we would very much like to do. And just another example, just to end this debate with facts, okay? Every time that Israel is ruining a house of a Bedouin, whether it's in a village, so to call, by Ma'ale Adomim, east of Jerusalem, or even in the Israeli Negev. Okay, there is a whole campaign, and the European Parliament is getting into sessions and sends tents and buildings and materials to rebuild them. Okay, while I'm sure that if Mr. Pedley over here, and I can give him all recommendation, he's a great guy, but yet if he would like to build some house here, the Berlin city will not allow it. And the fact that he wanted to be built here, it's very nice, but
Don't
not
use Berlin as an example. Chances are that the local government will let it happen.
they will allow you to go into those houses that are empty.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but they will not allow you to. This is.
But only
This is an example. Okay, so and no one even debate this thing. But when it comes to Israel, there is always this double standard, and it brings me to the opening sentence of Gadi about when you are taking only one people out of everybody else, and you treat them with another standard, if you like it or not, it becomes anti-Semitism.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm not referring to criticizing Israel, I'm not referring to criticizing Netanyahu's policy, I'm not referring to any legit and proportional criticism about Israel, as long as it's along the benchmark. But when you treat Israel differently, that's more solid.
I think it boils down to that at the end of the day. And that puts Israel on the defensive, which is negative also. But I think we'll all be pushed against the wall. We'll react in a way that might not be the way we maybe want to. So, thank you, Gadi.
Thank you
very much. Anybody who wants to contact Gadi, I'm sure he's going to be very available
I
via.
don't have a card, but
Call Oliver or myself if you have my card.
Exactly.
We will be more than happy.
And we, as most of you probably already know, or part of you, we have our periodic guests that we bring here, and also periodic press trips to Israel. We're trying to sensitize people to the topic. And I'm always looking forward to also the feedback from you, and it's always good to see all of you. So,
Thank you for your time.
very much.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.